Welcome back to the Oxendine Law Podcast. Jarrod Oxendine and Christine Palmer here to give you the most cutting edge and up-to-date advice on your legal situations as it relates to divorce. Today, we're talking about businesses. If you own a business and you're considering divorce, then your divorce comes with a unique set of opportunities and risks. So today, we're going to tell you everything that you need to know and give you business owners a game plan to protect your company and protect your financial interest before divorce papers are even filed. So first, Christine, let's talk about businesses. Most of the time, not most of the time, I'd say maybe half the time, with business owners, they have started their business before the marriage. Now, some people start their businesses during the marriage, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But a lot of the time, business owners have started their business before they get married. So that business will have a premarital component.
It will.
And it will also have a marital component. So the first thing you need to do is make sure that we value for that, because a lot of people make the mistake and they don't build in their premarital interest. They just treat the whole business as marital and they buy their spouse out based on 100% of the total value. Whereas if you get a financial accountant and a person that does business evaluations, then they can actually separate into two numbers. What your business was worth as of the date of marriage and what your business is worth now. And that portion that you acquired before you got married is yours, no claim by your spouse, right off the top.
Right. Because depending on the type of business and the industry that you are in, arguably, some businesses only truly grow in those first 5 years. And then you're at a steady maintaining. If you're a successful business owner, maintaining is a great strategy. Of course, some businesses you want to grow and you like to grow. Some small businesses, you want to get to the level where you're at and your only goal is to maintain. So if all of your growth was prior to the marriage, and since the marriage, you've simply been maintaining, yeah, there may be a significant portion of that business that is truly premarital, or it could be vice versa. You were a struggling little business, and while you were making ends meet and, everybody was getting paid, but there wasn't really true profits yet, you get married, maybe, at that point, things start to really grow and pick up and become bigger and bigger. There will be a premarital component, but it's probably not going to be as significant as if the roles were reversed.
That's right. And so, we're talking about what we can do to help business owners prepare and plan before they even file. I'll tell you one thing I like to do. Business valuations can get drawn out. They can cost a lot of money and they can take a lot of time. And the reason for that is we will hire our business valuation expert, and our expert will run their analysis and their accounting, and they'll provide a number. Well, guess what? Then the other side is going to hire their own business valuation expert, and they're going to go through the same documentation and information. They're going to come up, ironically, with a different number.
Sure.
And those numbers are usually very far apart because you're advocating for one person and the other valuation experts advocating for the other side. And so then we have to spend tons of time arguing over what the correct number is. So what I like to do, and it actually works out well. Now, this is not in the situation where you've already agreed on a number with your spouse. I'll talk about that in a second. But let's say your spouse is savvy and they're not willing to fall for the carrot you're dangling in front of their face about what you're going to pay them for their interest in the business, and they want a valuation done. Very smart, if you can, reach out to the other side. That's what I like to do. Reach out to the other side in writing and say, hey, I understand we got business ABC, and we need to get that valued so that we can start discussing how the assets are going to be divided. Can we agree on an expert?
Right.
Because it's awesome. If the other side will agree, yeah, I like so-and-so, we can jointly retain that expert. And now we have one expert they're dealing with that's doing a neutral job, giving us a solid neutral number. They're only having to do it once, not two experts doing it twice. It costs half the price, and everybody is bound by that final number at the end, depending on how you contract the paperwork. Sometimes people want to leave it out. If I disagree with the number, I can still hire my own expert. But you usually can say, hey, we're going to agree to use this person and be bound by their result. And now, once that's done, we can go straight into discussing the division of the case. And that's even before the case gets filed.
Right. And that way truly is probably the most honest and accurate assessment. Valuing a business is never going to be a dollar for dollar down to the penny number. It's just like appraising a home or literally anything. I mean, this Red Bull may cost more over here than it does at that gas station over there. It may cost more at the gas station than it does to buy it at Kroger. So the value is a range in literally everything that we do. So it's not like there's a hired gun that's just going to risk their reputation by assigning a number to something that isn't arguably correct. But at the same time, you're going to be giving the information that serves you best, while the other side is giving their expert the information that serves them best. And we're getting a range. We can cut all that out by everyone giving the best possible information to the same neutral expert in the middle. And they'll still give you a range normally. Say, I think the value is this. It could go as high as this and as low as this. So you have room to negotiate as well.
So we're giving you business owners our best advice on how you can get ahead. I'll give you another tip. If you've got the spouse that's in a hurry to get out and they're not financially savvy and they're not involved in the business, they have no idea what it's worth. Now, we represent the other side sometimes too. So I'd be giving that person different advice. But if you're that business owner, dangle the carrot. You know what your business is worth. Now, you'd be surprised how many business owners actually don't know what their business is worth. So if that's you, this doesn't apply. But if you're the savvy business owner, you know what your business is worth. You know what somebody would buy it for. You know what other comparable businesses like yours are selling for. Maybe you can come up with a number that looks really attractive to your spouse. And before the case is even filed, ask them if they'd be willing to sell for that number. And you'd be surprised how often they say, "What? You're going to pay me what?" And they say yes. And now you're way ahead of the game because you're paying less than what your exposure was. You're cutting down on time. You're also cutting down on the cost of an expert, and you're saving money on attorney's fees. So don't forget about that, because that actually works more often than you would think.
Right.
Now, we have situations where the business is completely marital, and we get into arguments, or I can't tell you how often I get the question from business owners. They're like, "Am I going to lose my business?"
Right.
Right? I mean, they are the business.
Uh-huh.
It started during marriage, so it's marital, but they're the one that's done all the work. They're the face of the business. They're the one that the customers call. They're the ones that are dealing with the employees. They're the ones that are managing the payroll, all the ins and outs. And their spouse is either not involved in the business at all or minimally involved in the business. Maybe they, help with some record keeping or some admin task.
Mm-hmm.
And that business owner will look at me and be worried that their spouse is going to get the business. And I have good news for you. Your spouse under that fact pattern is not going to get the business.
That's
So
right.
you're going to keep the business, but you will have to pay your spouse their fair share of the equity in that business.
Right. Because the courts, when they are deciding how to divorce people, they do want to completely separate the two people in all ways. Assets, debts, always separated. However, they're not there to ruin anybody. If you've got a successful business, that they want it to continue to be successful. A court's never going to say you're required to just liquidate your business, sell it out, and split it that way. No, it's not going to be that. If you have a successful, even mildly successful business, if it's paying your bills and that's your income, a court is not going to dissolve it or make it go away. You're going to be able to continue to operate your business like you always have. They'll just be the consequences of how much do you owe as the equity buyout of that business.
That's right. And unless you want to sell the business, we've had cases where, people are tired.
Yeah.
They've been running this business a long time, and the divorce was finally the last thing that put them over, and they're of retirement age. And you're like, you know what? We're just going to sell it, and whatever it brings, I'll divide it with you. So we've done that before. But most often, business owners, that's their baby. They want to keep their business, and so you'll get to keep that business. The court is not going to force it to be liquidated and sold, just like Christine said, but you'll have to buy your spouse out.
Right. And since we're talking about sort of pre-planning tips and what can you do in advance, if you do think divorce may be somewhere down the road, go ahead and get with your record keeper, whoever that is, if it's internal, if it is an external CPA, whoever, and just let them know ahead of time, because most likely there will be discovery, which I'm sure we've covered in another episode, but that's how we get information and how we get evidence. Most likely that's going to happen. When discovery is served, you have 30 days to respond. We have situations where we can ask for extensions, but you have 30 days to respond. Do you know who hates us when we say, hey, can you get me everything in the world in 30 days? The guy accounting, he's not his divorce, right? Like, he's got real life. And what if it's tax season and he's busy? He doesn't have time to stop everything. So what can you do to prepare? Go ahead and let that person be aware that I may need these documents. You don't have to tell us about a divorce. Just say, hey, I'm considering getting the business formally evaluated. Might be making some moves soon. They don't have to know it's about personal. Maybe they think you want to sell, whatever. I'm considering getting my business properly evaluated to consider all of my options. Can you sort of start gathering that stuff for me? Because sometimes it's not as easy as sticking in a flash drive and handing it over. Sometimes it's reports and there's analysis and there's things that you may need. So go ahead and give that person a heads up that I may be needing my records soon, so we don't run into a situation where we're begging the other side for extensions. Just be ready.
That's true. And something else I get, because we have situations where both parties are equally involved in the business. I've seen that. And I've had clients in the past that have just begged me and just been adamant that they want to continue to jointly own and operate that business together after the divorce, which is a horrible idea. And the good news is most judges, some judges don't read the paperwork that you submit,
Right.
which is surprising. But most judges do read the paperwork, and judges are not going to sign off on a divorce that says that the parties are going to continue to jointly own and operate an asset after the divorce, because the judge wants to make sure that we have a clean break, all assets are divided, and that includes any business. And trust me, guys, it's just not a good idea. You might think it's an easy way out. You might think that
Unless
y'all can get along with running the business, but if you can't stay married and run the business of your marriage together, you're going to have some problem after the divorce with running your business. And the reason the judge won't sign off on it is because you will be back in court, and the judge doesn't want to see you back in court. And then I know Christine has something to add. I'm going to tell you a quick story. I only did it once. I had a client, this was over 10 years ago, and she was adamant that her and her husband were going to run this business together after the divorce. And I said, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. She insisted. So we drew it up that way. Judge signed off on it. 3 years later, back in my office, had to file a completely separate lawsuit to go ahead and get that business divided.
Right. The only exception I wanted to bring up is not every couple solely owns a business. I have seen situations where a judge is not going to make you quote unquote liquidate if you have 3 other partners. So we're assuming when we're saying some of these things are very small business. There are larger businesses. You and your spouse together may only own 20% or 25% of a larger business. That's going to be handled separately, and courts do use discretion. They're probably not going to make that big business, be subject to the divorce somehow. You're going to determine what is the marital equity or what is your marital portion, and we're going to handle that discreetly on the side so that you aren't sort of dragged through the mud at your big corporate business if there are multiple partners. So
That's true.
that is an exception.
But if only the spouses are the owners.
Correct.
And we see this every once in a while. It's not as often as you would think it would be, but you have joint owners of the business, and they both are equally involved in the business.
Yeah,
And the question
it
becomes,
happens.
who gets the business?
Mm-hmm.
And so in my experience, judges don't like to sell businesses if they don't have to. The judge is going to hear the evidence and the testimony and make a decision as to who he or she thinks, he or she meaning the judge, who the judge thinks is the face of the business and the primary owner of the business, not necessarily on paper, but who's been more involved with the day-to-day operations and running the business. And usually that person will keep the business, and then the other person gets bought out for their fair share.
Right.
Now, the judge theoretically has the discretion in that circumstance to order that the business is sold, but usually I don't see judges do that, because that means the parties have to continue to operate and run the business together after the divorce until it sells.
Searching for a buy.
So usually the judge is going to have one person buy the other person out. All right, so hopefully y'all now understand the process of how we value a business for divorce. We give you some tips on how to try to hire a joint expert. We've talked to you about making sure you secure that premarital component and separate it out from the marital component. Now let's give some tips about actually buying your spouse out. And there's a big, huge tip that's often overlooked, and sometimes it's underused, but you got to make sure you take advantage of this. So let's say you're keeping the business, you're the business owner, and we've determined what the value of the business is, the marital value, whatever that number is. Some people make the mistake there's 2 mistakes. They will give their spouse half of that number, because that's half of the value, right? Makes sense. And let's say that business owner also makes a lot of income and their spouse doesn't work at all. On top of the buyout, they then will pay alimony. I had that happen. When my client, I wouldn't let that happen, but the other attorney made that mistake 2 months ago and gave half of the value for the buyout and alimony on top of it.
Which is
and it was my client. My client was the one getting bought out. We were happy. It is a double dip. Christine just hit the nail on the head. So first thing is, get a discount. You will get a discount. I've only had one judge in 20 years not give a discount. Why? And what I say by discount? Let's say your business is determined to be worth, let's make up a number, $500,000. Logically, it would seem that you have to give your spouse $250,000. No, you don't. Why? You've got to continue that business as a going concern. You've got to manage the business. You got to own the business. You got to operate the business. You got to keep creating the widgets. You got to sell the widgets. You got to manage payroll. You got to put all the work in, and there should be a discount for that. Your spouse doesn't get to, after the divorce, just sit at home and collect the check for half the value when you've got to maintain that business as a going concern. So I'm seeing generally at least a 25% reduction. Sometimes you'll see as high as like 40%.
Right.
But somewhere in that range, if you're the business owner, make sure you're getting that discount off the valuation before you buy your spouse out. So if that business is worth $500,000, you're looking for a 25 to 40% discount on that number. And then you take half of the difference, and that would be the buyout number.
Sure, because if you think about it, like the value is talking about what would someone pay for it. Okay, if you had a business that was worth exactly $500,000, you're probably not going to walk in and write a check for $500,000 to that owner because now you've just broken even. That's not a good business deal for you as a buyer, right? So if that's the value, as the buyer, you're coming in to say, okay, I've got to make an immediate profit off this. I'm not just going to hope it's profitable in the future. So that's an easy way to explain to the other side when they're not the savvy business owner who's not understanding. Like if I sold it, it wouldn't sell for what it's worth because nobody would do that. That's not what people that buy businesses do. They buy them at a discount so that they profit. That's how business works. So you're buying them out at what potentially would be the buyout price, not the exact highest value price.
That's exactly right. Love it. Good tips for you business owners. I hope you're listening. All right, let's say you've got exposure for alimony. What's the other tip? Try to structure your buyout to where you're paying out your ex-spouse, soon-to-be ex-spouse, over time. Why do I say that? Because the dollars that you're using to pay your spouse for their portion of equity in the business are the same dollars that you would be using for your income. So in other words, you're running your business and your business is producing income to you on a monthly basis. And from that income, you're paying your spouse out X number of dollars per month until you pay them out in full. So let's say you owe your spouse $250,000. Instead of stroking them a check for $250,000, structure it to where you pay it out over time. So maybe you're paying them $5,000 per month until the $250,000 is paid in full. Well, to ask for alimony on top of that, you can argue is a double dip because the money that you would be using to pay the alimony is the same money that you're using to pay your property division to buy out your spouse from the business. And it's not fair that they get alimony on top of the business buyout when it's all coming from the same pot of funds. So if you can use that argument to your advantage, you should. Now, we do have some business owners that have a lot of money sitting in a bank account and they can just stroke the check, or their spouse is demanding that they just stroke a check to them for everything that they owe. So depending on how many assets you've got, if you have money sitting in an account where you can just stroke your soon-to-be ex a check for the entire amount of their business interest, and you're still making $1 bajillion every month on top of that, and you still have millions of other dollars in the bank, you may still have that alimony exposure, but you'd be surprised how often we can structure that payout to where it gets rid of the alimony component. Another thing you could take advantage of if you're a business owner, you can actually make a lump sum payment in lieu of alimony. So let's say your business buyout is $250,000 and you got the money sitting in the account to stroke a check. That's nice because you don't have to pay that person out over time. But let's say because you've got so much money coming in every month and you have so many other assets, your spouse still has a good argument for alimony on top of that. Let's say, you got to pay them $5,000, for the next 2 years. That's $120,000, right? $5,000 per month times 12 is $60,000. So $120,000 over the next 2 years. You can get a discount if you just pay them lump sum. So in other words, instead of me paying $120,000 out over the next 2 years, maybe they'll take $60,000, cut that in half if I stroke them a check for the whole thing today.
Right.
And you're done. You're done with the business buyout, and you're also done with the alimony payout.
Yeah, both parties benefit, right? You're done, and they get the money up front right now because, nobody wants to think about this, but what if you die? And you die in a month too? And they got $10,000 when they were supposed to get $120,000.
Right.
So there's really benefits to both sides of that, plus just being done. Honestly, just being done and walking on and moving on. I know plenty of clients who, as long as they're getting a satisfactory number to walk away, will compromise on not getting exactly to that 50% on the dot. Like, give me a good number and let me be done.
Folks, that's what we got for today. We hope it was helpful. Make sure you protect your business assets and interests before your case even gets filed. Of course, we're always happy to answer questions. Reach out to us. We'll be happy to help. Subscribe wherever you're getting this information from, wherever you're watching our podcast. Subscribe. Hit that button on YouTube, and that way you'll be first to get alerts on future tips and future episodes. As always, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.